Hello, and welcome back after a lengthy winter break to Treehouse Chat, your weekly, highly informed, highly researched podcast. Every week, we have a randomly generated word in which we all go out, do research inspired by said word, and bring it to the table. This week's word, I suppose last month's word, was envelope. Actually, December, so that was 2 months ago now. Envelope. Let's see. I am Joseph. I'm majoring in philosophy and literature.
I'm Connor, studying the culinary arts and music production.
I'm Kevin. I'm a business major, specifically in marketing and finding out what people want in this world.
All right.
And I'm Trenton, otherwise known as Tshrades, and I study microbiology.
Nice. Last little note. You can find us on SoundCloud, iTunes, and YouTube.
Tell your friends.
Tell your friends, family, relatives, girlfriends, boyfriends. It's them.
Yeah.
Whatever it is.
If you're a fan,
Remind
share us
yourself.
on the social media. Tell friends and family, as they're saying, and get the word out, because the Treehouse is trying to invite new members.
All right. And on that note, let's hop right into it. Kevin, let's see what you got for us.
All right. Well, guys, long break coming from winter break where we spent, I want to say a full month, if not a month and a half, just
Something
kind of
like
like intercontemplating, doing our own things, living on winter break. But hey, here we are back with envelope this week. And so I started thinking about envelope, and I started thinking about, like you pass messages through envelopes, you pass on all that kind of stuff, and I was like, what was the first kind of messaging system created? And although it's not necessarily the first, it's by far the coolest, and I thought about homing pigeons.
Oh,
Right, so I'm going to talk about today some homing and messenger pigeons. So right off first, I want to talk about, like, the average homing pigeon, or what you would call a messenger pigeon, is actually derived from the rock pigeon, which was specifically bred for the bird's ability to find its way home over extremely long distances. So that's really what makes the homing pigeon, or an off-brand of the rock pigeon, kind of
so
viable.
It can just go home.
So what I don't know quite the science behind it, but from what I understood from my research was that with the rock pigeons, like, they can fly wherever, but it's almost like they have a guided sense home no matter what. It's like an automatic GPS, such as Siri, where it's like, I want to go home, well, here's where it is, and it just is like biologically implanted in their brain, and they know how to get home.
So these things, they wouldn't, like, take a message there and back. You'd have to, like, take one from its homeland, and then it could only send it one way, back home.
That's what it was at first, and I'll go into that later. But
Okay.
what I've got so far for you is flights as long as 1,100 miles have been recorded by birds in competitive racing. So hear me out here. Before we go into the rest of this, I want to talk to you a little something called, what I found out was competitive homing pigeon racing.
Oh, yeah. When is
So-
this? Is this recent?
Yeah, so this is recent. This is still done in now times. And basically how a
In the
homing
nowtimes.
pigeon race is conducted is, like, they have a set distance, let's say X miles away. All the pigeons fly there and fly back, and the one with the quickest time is the winner.
Oh.
And so
they
that's
do-
how homing pigeon races. It's pretty, like, a small community, I want to, like, say, just simply because they're homing pigeons. Who knows about homing pigeons? But it's a very
We
small
do now.
community.
Yeah.
And, yeah, they definitely do have competitive homing pigeon races where people will bet money on them and possibly win. You never know.
That's awesome, like horse racing.
But as I was reading into this, I realized that, as I said, flights as long as 1,100 miles have been recorded by birds that have flown in competitive pigeon
Okay,
racing.
wait, how far exactly is that? Can we...
1,100 miles?
Yeah.
1,100 miles, I
For
want to say, is
comparison.
like Kansas City to most western Utah is almost what I want to say for 1,100 miles. Simple because, like, I flew to LA over spring break, whenever
Yeah.
it was, for, I want to say 6 hours. So with homing pigeons, I want to say probably around like 11 to 12 hours to get to the eastern edge of Utah, western edge
I mean,
of California.
Here to
What?
California is about
What?
1,600.
Well, I mean, they're going about 60 to 100 miles per hour depending on
What?
the bird.
No way.
Yes, sir.
That is
God
nuts.
damn.
They fly up to 60 to 100 miles per hour depending on, like, how well trained the bird is, like, all those kind of things. Biologically, I want to say they go from, like, 40 to 70.
Is that 110 hours? That's 11,000 Or is it 1,100 miles?
1,100 miles.
Okay.
1,100 miles.
So that's 11 hours.
Fuck, 11,000 miles.
We're just going for it.
So
How much is
Kansas,
it to-
Kansas City to California is 1,600. I'm almost
Okay,
positive.
yeah.
About. So
Yeah, that's like Salt Lake City.
1,100. That is quite a
It's a
distance.
decent
These guys
amount.
are booking it.
These
That's
birds are
halfway
just
across
going
America.
caw, caw, just flying their way through. And I want to say the sport of homing pigeons, they call it a sport. I'm going to
Now,
emphasis the
nowadays.
word sport on the homing pigeon line of thinking. Anyway, it was established over 3,000 years ago. And way, way, way back in the day, it was used to actually proclaim the winner of the ancient Olympics.
Wow.
Believe it or not. Way back when it was just like Greece and all that kind of stuff, before America was founded, before the countries were founded, like way back when, they were used to like decide the winner of the Olympics. And I was like, hey, that's pretty cool.
Well, you can only trust a pigeon with that sort of information.
Right? No
No
man
man-
can hold the
No
information
man
a pigeon
can carry
can.
the sacred wisdom.
They kill each other. And
Yeah. They would drive a mortal man crazy with a single look.
So just a little history into the homing pigeons. I will say they were a very popular form of passing messages in the Middle East during the I want to say during the mid 1100s, same time when like pigeon racing first came about. But fun fact, Genghis Khan, y'all know about Genghis Khan. I don't remember the song where it's like Genghis Khan, blah blah blah, some pop singer.
I don't know what you're
Whatever
talking
is this time, I swear to God there was a pop singer that said something
I know
about
what you're
Genghis
talking
Khan.
about.
Genghis Khan, really fond of messenger pigeons. He's sent many himself. Good form of travel, if I do say so myself. But
He only trusted the pigeon.
he only
It sounds
trusts
like-
the pigeons.
Sounds like these are the only trustable form of message carrying.
You never know. Birds don't know what the fuck's going on.
Or they do.
Or they do and they don't tell us. But in 1818, a great pigeon race was actually called... Hear me out. What do you guys think a great pigeon race would be called? Something pigeon related, right?
Yeah. The Pidgerathon.
Yeah, no. It's called the Cannonball Run.
Yeah.
They
let's
named the
go.
very first great pigeon race the Cannonball
That
Run.
makes it sound so
That's tight.
awesome, though. Like,
Oh, yeah.
if you hear, yo, you want to go to the Cannonball Run?
Oh,
They're
dude,
like,
who's
"Oh,
playing? Who's
dude,
playing at the Cannonball Run?
Let's get out there. What are
The
we
pigeons
watching?
all over the nation.
You get there, and it's just like a bunch of pigeons in cages. Like,
And that actually took place in Brussels, Belgium. If you guys have ever heard of Brussels, Belgium.
yeah.
I just say Belgium simply because
Yeah,
Belgium,
yeah.
but Brussels sprouts.
there you go.
Okay.
Key.
Sure.
Anyway, in 1860, Paul Reuter, which was actually, he was some man that created a somewhat famous agency, but I just know him as the man who made a press agency, because who cares about press? Let's be
Okay.
honest.
He's in the press
But-
industry.
He's in the press agency, but he used a fleet of over 45 pigeons to deliver news and stock prices between Brussels and Acaen, which were both,
The pigeon fleet.
I believe it was between
What-
Belgium and France.
What was the second city you said?
A can?
Acaen, which I
A
believe
single
is in
can.
France.
Can.
I'm like 95%
Because
sure
I know
it's in France.
Cannes is a city in France. I
Mhm.
can. I
A
don't know.
can.
Yeah.
No, it was
One
actually
individual
just an
can.
empty Coke can in the
Oh.
desert.
After cooking, the pigeon just land there and chill out for a little bit.
Send this message to.
Somewhere in Europe, though.
And another kind of like cool fact about just kind of homing pigeon and messenger pigeon or pigeons in general is the outcome of the Battle of Waterloo. I'm sure many of you have heard of it from
Waterloo?
yeah, the Battle of Waterloo from the Civil War.
Okay.
I believe it was Civil War. But it was also first delivered by pigeons to England. So when England found out about the Battle of Waterloo or whatever, which was between the U.S. forces and the England forces, England had no idea what was going on until a homing pigeon showed up and was like, "Yo, we lost the Battle of Waterloo."
From who?
Huh?
From who?
The English generals, whoever was there fighting the Americans, realized, "Oh shit, we're losing."
Yeah, you can only trust the pigeons.
You can only trust the pigeons. How else are they gonna get to England?
Yeah, and it's not like your enemy's gonna start shooting every pigeon they see.
Right? There's too many of them.
Capture your magic messages.
And another kind of cool fact is during the Franco-Prussian War, pigeons were used to carry mail between besieged Paris and the French occupied territory, actually. Which is really super interesting, the fact that even when one city is under siege, the fact that you can send pigeons in and still get messages in and out of that city to the outside sources that are still their allies during that time, which I find is fascinating. The fact that
that's how you talk to people in North Korea. Messenger pigeon.
Get the message in.
messenger pigeon to North Korea.
Side
Ain't stopping
note. Battle of Waterloo was the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
France.
Mhm.
Napoleon Bonaparte.
Si, senor.
Yeah, so from France to England. So like not as far.
Still think.
But huge, crucial role.
The pigeons couldn't care about a distance as long as they get their message delivered.
There you go.
I'm pretty sure pigeons are super smart too.
Oh, I'm
I'm
sure.
pretty sure they are.
I
Yeah,
was watching
very
a thing
smart.
recently that they're like a lot smarter than anybody gives them credit for.
So I will say, in 1870, so this is within the last, like, I want to say, like, 160 years or however long it was. In 1870, it took about 10 hours for a pigeon carrying microfilms to fly over France to Belgium. And I found microfilms really interesting at first because I was thinking they must mean just kind of like movie films or something like that on those like kind of cartridges. But it turns out a microfilm is actually just like a very small document, kind of compressed into one tiny document and rolled up and sent on a pigeon, which then could be, I want to say transcribed, but read by someone else.
You
And
put
just
it on like
kinda
a
open.
microscope and it's just super tiny.
Exactly. It's like you're doing research. Your biology research, except with words.
Well, I mean, yeah, if you gotta fit it on a pigeon's ankle, you really gotta keep that really small.
Right? So that was a big thing in the 1870s. So historically, pigeons carried messages only one way to their home. They had to be transported manually before another flight.
Okay.
However, by placing their food at one location and their home at another, the pigeons have been trained to fly back and forth up to twice a day, hear me, up to twice a day reliably while covering round-trip flights up to 100 miles. So pigeons can fly up to twice a day over 100 miles just to deliver messages as long as their food's in one place and their home's in another.
Yeah, man.
That's what I'm thinking about, just way
Oh,
back
yeah.
when.
I kinda
Great for
wanna
transferring messages.
I wanna, yeah.
I want a homing pigeon for myself. Name it like Albert.
Yeah, go to the park and feed them a lot and befriend one. Just be like, fly for me, boy.
So I found this kind of interesting. The Great Pigeongram Service, established between Auckland, New Zealand, and the Great Barrier Island in 1897, which was also another part of New Zealand. So both are in New Zealand, but it's kind of spread out. Is possibly the first regular airmail service in the world.
Of pigeons?
It was comprised of pigeons, but of like airmail services in the world, it was created in 1897 in New Zealand
That's
through
dope.
pigeons. Yes.
Yo.
Just-
Yeah, the first airmail, that's crazy.
Just
Er-
all throughout the island of New Zealand,
Mhm.
just like send out the pigeon fleet.
They just have this luxury mail.
There's been
transport.
pigeons.
An exact threat. You know how when you send letters now, you have to have stamps to go on them?
Yeah.
So, with that, the world's first airmail stamps were actually issued for the Great Barrier Pigeongram Service
That's
from
interesting.
1898 to 1908.
So the first stamp was for a pigeon letter.
It was for a pigeon letter.
Dang,
For the whole
I bet
service
that
of
had
pigeon
to be
letters.
so small. I bet they looked wildly different.
Oh,
That's what I'm saying.
damn.
I'm not quite sure if they they do
tiny-
not roll now. Like no one sends pigeons
Well,
to
I'm-
deliver
It's
letters
around.
now. But it could still be around. It's still a thing. And homing pigeons were still employed in the 21st century by certain remote police departments in the Odisha state in eastern India to provide emergency communication services following natural disasters.
Yeah.
So, like, past the point of the rest of the world is, like, slowly kind of growing out of the homing pigeon era. I mean, we've got UPS, we've got all these other postal service, we got airplanes, all that. India is still using them to notify kind of the rest of the country about natural disasters that do occur.
Well, it's reliable.
It's reliable, it's factual, I think it's pretty incredible that they still do that.
It's the
I find
only
it very
thing that like
interesting.
can't be breached too, like hacked or something.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's no record of it. It's like
Genuine.
physical. You take it, you burn it.
Mm-hmm.
For secret messages.
And then in 2002, sadly enough, in 2002, it was announced that this system would be retired, and it has solely to do with the kind of expandation of the internet. So as the internet has been exploring, homing pigeon in the England Natural Disaster Department as well as all over the world has been declining simply because we have internet. You can email, text, like instant message anyone you need to. You don't need to send a pigeon.
Like I said, that's
10
hackable.
days. It's hackable.
I bet they still do it. I bet they say, we're not going to do it anymore. And
They're
then
doing
they're...
it secret.
They still
Oh,
sending those homing
totally.
pigeons out.
Totally.
And also interesting to note, the Taliban banned the keeping or use of homing pigeons in Afghanistan.
Oh, it's because they can't track it.
So as well as the Taliban aren't that kind of like a preeminent force right now,
Yeah.
they were still like, no, we understand the benefit of homing pigeons, and we're not gonna let you guys use them to
You
like.
messing with
Yeah.
the pigeon.
Exactly, you don't fuck with the pigeon.
Pigeons are too good. X-nay on the pigeons.
And to this day, actually, pigeons are entered into competitions with the winner receiving prize money at the end. So it's not really that homing pigeons are used nowadays as a kind of transportation of letters and messages, where it's more kind of used for sport, where they're like I'm guessing complete speculation here, but some dude's like, oh, I love pigeons, and just buys a whole bunch of pigeons and then eventually just kind of tries to race them and make money. You never know. Like, I'm sure they make bank too, but I'm sure I don't even know how long a pigeon.
Just like
lasts.
horse racing, and they gamble, and they got like mad pigeons, like they're prize pigeons. They're like, this is Andromeda's Rex, and you sit him in, and he's like a buff pigeon, and he gets out there, and he's wearing like gold chains. It's his prize champion.
The prize champion
He
pigeon.
had like hype music, and he clucks out onto the field.
So speaking of kind of like prize pigeons, what I want to end you guys with today before I close out my segment here is just kind of a more interesting transgression towards pigeons, which is actually the trade of smuggling with
Pigeons?
the use of pigeons. No, not smuggling pigeons. Using pigeons to smuggle.
Oh.
So,
What, tiny amounts of drugs.
hear me out here. Homing pigeons have been reported to be used as smuggling technique, getting objects and narcotics across borders and into prisons.
What are they gonna carry? Like a teep?
Hear me out here. For example, between 2009 and 2015, pigeons have been reported to carrying cell phones, SIM cards,
Whoa.
phone batteries, and USB cords into prisons in the in the Brazilian state of Sao Paulo. But
Sao Paulo?
I can only
Sao
say if
Paulo.
it's been caught there, it's definitely been done elsewhere in the world as we know it. And I guarantee homing pigeons are still used today, maybe on the
That's
DL.
sneaky.
But in total, homing pigeons, great use of messenger system in the past. A
Still
continued
used.
historical use today. And hey, your Nino in jail, send them some drugs, send them some SIM cards, cell phones, whatever you got to do. But hey, homing pigeons are very much alive.
Way to do it.
And that's how I took envelope this week. So fuck the Patriots because the Super Bowl's bullshit.
Super Bowl Sunday.
And
we
yeah,
hate the Patriots.
let's hear from Tshrades next. What you got for us today?
I'll tell you what I have for you, but first of all, I wanted to make a point. I could see SIM cards, but not a cell phone.
See, I was wondering the same thing about a full cell phone being transferred into a prison.
It'd
That's
probably
like
be one of
both
those.
legs.
It's
But
probably
at
one
this
of those
point-
light flip phone kind of like.
We all
real-
remember those light flip phones you flip up. You got
Yeah.
T9 Word if you really want to text and all
know.
that fun stuff. Nowadays, there's probably jewel-sized cell phones. Let's be honest.
I don't know. It seems far-fetched. Any sort of cell phone you're gonna want it, unless you got like the ultimate of Japanese technology, like the Mitsubishi 5000.
The Mitsubishi 5000 cell phone
Yeah, like a
fits in
little
your
version.
pocket. Vapes as
Alright.
well.
So, I took the envelope. What's a common phrase with the envelope? Pushing the envelope. So, I decided to talk about a dude.
What does this phrase mean?
Pushing the envelope?
Yes.
You never heard about that? You ever heard that phrase?
I don't believe so.
You're just kind of stepping out into unwalked grounds. You're kind of doing it for the first time. You're getting creative. You're like thinking out. You're like doing what no person's done before. You're pushing the envelope of man's capabilities. Like that's
Okay.
one use.
So this is a man who pushes the envelope.
He pushes
Or
the
woman.
envelope in a big way. No, it is a man.
It is a man.
So the United States, for one, has always loved to push the envelope in many ways. We like to be the first. We like to make it known that we're the first. And we're really cocky about it. So when it comes to somebody that might openly declare that they're going to push the envelope faster and better than us, what do you think we're going to do?
I think we're gonna push the envelope back.
Oh yeah, and we're going to get in a race with them.
A race. I agree.
1955, the space race.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
no!
yeah.
Against Soviet
Yeah.
Russia, Putin.
Uh-huh. The Soviet Union. So they challenged the U.S. on who could make it into space first.
What was it? Was it like an explicit challenge? Did they actually say, "We challenge you"?
Yeah.
Who can get there first?
They said that they would do it first. Basically, they
Okay.
either did an interview or just like a massively public notice, and I think it even wound its way to the U.S.,
So
which
is it
is what made them so
more
mad.
So they were
like
trying
a-
to one up us.
Was it more like Russia saying, "Oh, we're gonna get there first," and then we're like, "Oh no, you're not. It's on," or was it like Russia going, "Hey, I bet we're gonna beat you there"?
No, so the
You were
U.S.
like, hell no.
The U.S. declared that they would do it soon, and
Okay.
right after that, within days, the Soviet Union declared that they would do it first.
Okay, alright, okay.
So it was on.
Oh, certainly.
So the Soviet Union did, in fact, beat the U.S. in getting the first satellite to space.
Satellite,
was-
but not man, right?
That was
Wasn't
one
it
of the big
Sputnik?
things. I think
Pretty
so.
sure.
Sputnik. And they were also the first to achieve sending a human into space. So that's what this is about. This is about the first human being in space.
Was it the Armstrong?
The
No.
Armstrong.
It was
No.
never the Armstrong.
So he was a part of the crew that was the first to the moon.
Yeah.
But
which
not
is
to
what-
space.
That's what the U.S. likes to claim victory on.
But the
it was-
USSR beat us to space
It was the
itself.
space race, and they got to space first.
Do you know? I'm just curious. I have no idea if you know from research. But what did they define as space at that time?
Just breaking the Earth's orbit, I think, just achieving zero gravity.
Like zero gravity?
Yeah. Well, he did it pretty solidly. Like it wasn't any contest. There was no contest.
Mm-hmm.
So the dude's name, Yuri Gagarin. Gagarin. I don't know. He was a Soviet. So.
Gangrene.
Gagarin. He's the first person in history, the entire history of this Earth, to leave it and enter space, as well as orbit the entire planet.
And he came back alive.
Oh yeah.
No way!
Mm-hmm.
And
Respect.
This was in '55, or was that just when this race started?
That's when the race started. This happened a little bit later. I'll kind of give
But
you the lead up.
before-
It was a little bit later.
69, obviously.
Let's see. It was 61
61.
when he went out. So they officially won the space race. They achieved. He went into space. He got a full orbit. It was no contest. And they did a couple. After we got to the moon first, they tried to do a couple manned moon launches, and it didn't really go well, and they didn't really care for it. So then they started focusing on more satellites and space stations, resulting in the ISS, which we now habitate. We kind of, the space race has long ended. So Yuri was born March 9th, 1934, to a bricklayer and a milkmaid.
This was right before World War One, wasn't it?
34.
World War
34?
II. Right
Or was
before
that
World
right
War
after
II.
World War
That was
One?
right
Right.
in the 40s, right?
Oh yeah,
World War II.
World War II. So you're gonna see.
It was 42 when the U.S. entered
It hits
World
him.
War Two.
So this is the first astronaut, first man into space, born to a bricklayer and a milkmaid.
Oh yeah.
A milkmaid bricklayer.
He worked on a collective farm. He was the third of 4 children, Valentine and Zoya, who are his older brothers, and Boris. who's his
Can I
older
say
brother.
something though, real quick about baby names?
Yeah.
Way more badass way back when than they are
Zoya.
now. Now
No.
you've got like
There was
Kyle and
this-
Brevin.
Brevin.
There was this guy I learned about in my environmental science class. His name was Theodosius. And I was
Oh
like, yo.
man.
Like,
That's
come on,
awesome.
man.
Because you can be called Theo.
Yeah.
You're like,
Or Theodore.
oh,
but-
Theodosius.
Theodore Dosius.
You almost have to say it in like a really manly voice.
Oh, yeah.
You're gonna be saying
How could
that.
you ever not be
Oh, hey, I'm
successful as
Theodosius.
Theodore Dosius?
Yeah, Theodosius.
The Dosius.
So yeah, he was with Zoya and Boris. So during World War II, many people in the Soviet Union, including the Gagarin family, had to house Nazi soldiers.
Oh,
In 1941, when Yuri was just 7 years old, an officer took over their home. The family was allowed to build a mud hut in the backyard behind their house. It was 10 feet by 10 feet.
They could only have a 10-foot by 10-foot house.
Yeah, in their backyard.
Mud house.
Was this
A
during
mud hut.
what year was this? Do you
41,
know?
1941.
Right before World War
Right.
II.
Yeah, well, as
'Cause World War II is beginning, right before U.S. enters World War II.
So they just get fucked. Like, an officer walks in, he's like, this is mine now, you can go live in the backyard, I guess. Make it out of mud. Make it out of mud. For 6 people. Can you imagine? I mean, what size of room is this? This room is, like, bigger than 10 feet by 10 feet.
Oh no, not this way. That's
Not-
not 10 feet.
But
Not
close.
We're in a
This way is
rectangle.
probably about 10, but
Yeah.
you
But
could
it's,
fit like
smaller.
7,
Laying
8 people
down
in
in
10
here-
foot.
it's ridiculous. So it's basically like they're living in a treehouse.
Yo, you
A
guys
family
want
of
to
6.
have the full experience? You can live in this
Living
room.
Well, guess how long they did it? A year and 9 months.
All right, boys. Challenge accepted.
Strap in, a year and 9 months in the treehouse. So, in 43, after the time had gone by, Yuri's 2 older siblings, Valentin and Zoya, so a woman.
Yeah.
Zoya was a woman. They were deported by the Germans to Poland to be slaves.
Oh no, man, that's a terrible,
I know, they just got
terrible
fucked.
fact.
As soon as they get out the mud hut,
They get sent to fucking a
There's-
working camp.
yeah, sent to slavery.
Dude, the Germans are savage.
Didn't return for 2 years,
2
1945.
years.
So
They
you-
lived though. They lived.
They lived.
They lived.
So Yuri was educated, and at the age of 16, he entered an apprenticeship as a foundryman at a steel plant near Moscow.
All right.
He worked and took night classes through an entire year, and graduated with honors in mold making and foundry work.
I always wonder what kind of like university would be way back then compared to what we have to do now with like computers and homework and doing stuff online.
Yeah.
What do you think they had to do back then?
I think they just did it, and if they did a good job, they were just like, good job. You graduate. You
Gave
know
them
it.
that accreditation.
You did it, and you graduate. There you go. I gotta imagine it was something like that. I think they just did have them do work, and once they decided they had done enough work, they were like, okay, you graduate.
Good enough. You're close enough to the happy spectrum.
So after that, he graduated with honors. He was selected for further training in industrial school, and he specialized in tractors.
Ayo!
This is our man. This is our astronaut.
Our astronaut is a specialist in tractors.
But he stayed busy.
Last time, I will have to say, I've never heard of a tractor going to space.
A tractor of specialist in tractors.
Specialist at tractors, I've never heard making it to space, so I'm curious to see how this man made it.
So he kept himself busy. While he studied tractors, he also volunteered during the weekends to train as a Soviet air cadet at a local flying club. He learned to fly a biplane and a Yak-18 trainer.
Alright.
During this time, he also worked as a dock laborer part-time. So taking class, volunteering to be a pilot, and working on the docks.
So he's just doing whatever he can to get money,
Yeah,
just to get him going in life.
he's hard to work.
Hard worker.
In 55, he finished technical school and was drafted by the Soviet Army, going first to an Air Force pilot school, and then he was stationed after that at an air base near Norway for quite a long time.
Is this during World War II?
Yeah, this is through, so he later became a senior lieutenant while he was stationed there. This was 59. So this is 40 through 1960, he's doing this. And during that time when he was stationed at that air base, he met his love, Valentina Goryacheva.
Valentina Goryancheva.
Goryacheva. She was a medical technician, and the two got married and had 2 daughters.
So they met during both of them in the military at the time?
Yeah.
Alright.
So 1960, the Soviet space program was conducting an extensive search and selection process, and Yuri was chosen alongside 19 other pilots.
Just to carry out like an air raid or anything?
Well, no, it's the Soviet space program. So Pretty much the space race is agreed that it launched in 1955.
Mhm.
So this is 5 years past, and they're just like really trying to make it, and so like they think they have the science and research done, and now they need to find men.
So they
And-
take these pilots
Yeah.
and they're just like, I think we have enough done to get you to space. You guys want to join us? And
Yeah.
they're just like, hey,
Well, who
come
do
fly
you
to
go
space.
to? There's no astronauts at the time.
That's
There's
true.
There's no schooling. There's nothing you can do to prepare.
And this is kind of before the U.S. entered the space race. This is
We're in the space.
we're in the space race.
Yeah.
It's the U.S. versus the Soviet Union, basically trying to race to space.
Yeah. So they just turned to the military pilots, and they're like, well, if anybody is going to space, I guess we'll send a pilot of an aircraft. I guess it's the same. So he was a favored candidate by the other 20. And when the 20 of them were asked anonymously to vote for which of the other candidate they would like to see to fly into space first, all of them except for 3 chose Yuri.
Oh man! So is that a good thing or a bad thing for Yuri
They
here?
either liked him or they hated him.
They're like, fuck this guy. Let's send him to space.
This
Or
shit blows up.
this guy's gonna get us to space, and it's gonna be okay.
They're like, let's ditch him in space. We'll have a better chance on the next one. But, so he was a popular guy, and he wanted to go, and they liked him. He was eventually selected for an elite training group known as the Sochi 6.
So
So he made it to the top 6. He went from 20 to 6. Gagarin and the other prospective candidates were subjected to various experiments designed to test physical and psychological endurance.
Just like no one's been to space. They're just like, we think this is what you have to know. You gotta,
Like-
you gotta be prepared for this. We don't know what's gonna
Think they
happen in space, but
Prepared for the isolation tests and
I'm sure, I wonder, because like the only thing I ever see is like in the movies when they swing him around in that pod really, really
Yeah.
fast.
oh man.
I've also seen
How-
a little Lockheed in a small thing modeled after the ship you'll
The
be
shuttle, and it was
in,
small.
and they make you stay in there for
Yeah.
a long time to make sure you can handle it.
Have you done it, Joe?
No.
Lock
I
yourself
used
in
to
your
want
closet.
to.
I would like to be an
I
astronaut.
think that'd be pretty
I
cool. We
wouldn't
could all
wanna do
just go
that.
to a G-force chamber and see how hard it really is.
So the eventual choice for the first launch was Yuri, due to his exceptional performance during training sessions and as well as his height, a key factor, because the cockpit of the Vostok 1 was very small.
So-
And he was only 5'2".
5'2" man,
He got in there because of his height.
successful fighter pilot, good during war, and they're just like, hey, you're short, you're good, let's send you to space, we'll see what happens.
Pop up there.
Pop up there, see what's going on.
So the Vostok 1 was a small cannonball-like circular ship. This was essential because the ship had to hit 17,500 miles per hour.
And this was the Soviet Union ship at this time, right?
Yeah. So this is about 5 miles per second.
Oh my god.
That this man is in a little cannonball comet launching up into space where no man's been before. Like, I would be terrified.
At 5 miles a second.
At 5 miles a second.
Before the Vostok 1, no other ship could hit this speed with a live man inside.
So this is the first time they've done like a live test.
With the live
ultimately,
man, yeah.
With a live man going to space.
In 1961, when Yuri was just 27,
27 years
the
old.
Vostok 1 spacecraft was launched from Baikonur Cosmodrome. I love that word. The
Do you by
Cosmodrome.
chance know where that like is?
No.
Is it just in Russia
Somewhere-
somewhere?
Somewhere maybe near his air base, I don't know, in the Soviet Union. He orbited Earth exactly one time, going around 17,500 almost all the time. It took less than an hour and a half.
So can I make a point with that? All those flatlanders out there. Just curious.
Flat Earthers.
We got plenty of people that have seen space throughout the century. How could Earth be flat?
See, they're all in on the secret together.
They knew in 1961.
And they just, it's all been a secret sense.
So this guy really saw a flat Earth, and
Uh-huh.
he gets back to Earth, and he's like, tell only 1 or 2 people. We're going to tell everybody it's an orb, and it's going to be hilarious, and we're going to tell all the smart people it's an orb, but we're going to secretly know it's a flat disc. Well, I don't think that happened. Anyway, so this made him the first man in history to enter space and to orbit the Earth. A few weeks prior to launch, a prototype craft called the Vostok 3KA-2 was launched and also completed a low orbit of Earth. This spacecraft, carried a life-size dummy and a dog whose name was Zvezdochka
So it was a dog and a dummy that go up to space for
Yeah.
like kind of that first orbit.
for weight purposes. And the name was Zvezdochka. And that translates to Little Star, which is fitting. And it's also said that Yuri named that dog. So he followed
Did he
that.
now?
He followed that dog into space.
Did Yuri ever go with the dog to space? Personally?
I don't think so. No, well, actually, I know not. Because after that, they wouldn't let him go back to space.
They wouldn't let him go back a second time. They were like, "You've done it once, we're not letting you go again."
Yeah. He got back and he became so massively famous, they couldn't afford to let him die. So-
No more space flights for you. You have to stay on the United. You
Yeah.
have to stay in the world and sell bonds.
So he became a national hero instantly, the second he landed, and a worldwide celebrity. Newspapers printed stories, there were mass parades held, and he was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union. He toured widely in Italy, Germany, Canada, Brazil, Japan, Egypt, and the UK, and Finland. And this is all just to promote the Soviet Union's accomplishment and basically brag. Because notice he did not go to the United States.
Does anyone know when the United States actually made it to space?
I'm sure not
Well,
long
the
after.
moon was in '69
Okay.
or '8.
Yeah.
So it was about in the same time period.
Yeah, so I'm sure it wasn't long after. So the rise to fame took a toll on him, however. Although he was not known as a large drinker, he was constantly attending social events where he was expected to drink.
Oh man.
So this kind of led for him to get in some worse habits, and he was also reportedly caught by his wife in a room with another woman.
Oh man.
I know.
What's her name? Monica Lewinsky.
Her fame was Anna. Annika Lewinsky. Annika
Annika
Gagarinsky.
Sounds kind of hot.
Yeah, that's an actual name, was it?
No.
Okay.
Her name was Anna. She had aided him in a boating incident earlier in that day.
Oh no.
And so, what does he do? He jumps out the second story window.
Ayo.
He hits his face, slamming his forehead on a curbstone,
Oh man.
which left a permanent scar above his left eyebrow.
Did
I
it
hope.
not kill him?
No, he lived.
Oh my
He just
God.
jumps out of a second story
That's
window,
worse.
fucks up his face, and
Bam!
it's just like,
I
you know,
would want that.
it happened.
I'm glad he took it in the forehead though, instead of like maybe his teeth. Oh man, just goes
Oof.
like the ancient curb stomp by gravity.
I feel like God was watching
So,
over.
hold on, he jumped out the window because he got walked in on with another
By his
woman?
wife, yeah.
And so it's just like, shit.
Oh shit, babe! I'm sorry. Whoa! Out the window.
Instead of dealing with that, he's just like, I'm going nose dive, baby.
I'm
let's go."
going out.
I'm outie.
Aim for the bush.
Flee the scene. Yeah, aim for the bushes. So that went by, and he was still just living in the limelight. They wouldn't allow him to go into space, and he became a colonel. He was, however, eventually he got to become a backup pilot for his friend Vladimir Komarov. Maybe.
Vladimir Komarov.
In
Was
the
he? Well, he was the USSR, right?
Yeah, in the Soyuz 1 flight.
Mm.
Despite Gagarin's protests that additional safety precautions must be had before the flight could happen, the Soyuz 1 was launched.
So before it was like professionally kind of safeguarded,
Yeah,
or
he
just
knew.
like people were like, "Oh, this is safe to fly on." They were just like, "Let's launch it. Fuck it."
He knew. The flight ended in a fatal crash.
Of course it
It
did.
killed his friend Komarov, and Gagarin was permanently banned from training for and participating in further space flights.
Because
Why?
he took off in a flight that crashed and it wasn't his fault?
Why do you think?
The psychological issues?
He's too famous to lose.
Gosh, he's a commodity now, that's why.
So this whole thing and Gagarin's death, which I'll get into, led to a lot of conspiracies. And I was thinking, I hadn't read many of these because I didn't want to get too much into conspiracies. But I'm thinking, their most famous man who's spreading the word of Soviet Union, like this is their guy, their figurehead. They can't lose him. He finally asks. They make him a backup. They intentionally botch the flight. It bombs, so they have an excuse not to ever let him into space again.
Yep. I can see it.
So they planned the death of his friend to never let him into space. Because why else? I mean, why would they ban him? It makes no sense. Unless he like got mad and started a fight or something, but I didn't read that anywhere.
Oh, Russia. Simple ties from space exploration to corrupting our current president. You never know.
Well, March 27th, 1968, just 7 years after his flight into space, he was on a routine training flight, and he and his flight instructor both died in a crash.
Coincidence?
Well, I think this one was a coincidence. The cause of the crash that killed Gagarin is not entirely certain, and has been subject to speculation about multiple conspiracy theories, like I was saying. The KGB did their own investigation, and we know, I mean, they're not always the most necessarily forthright. It was declassified to the public in 2003, and it stated that an air traffic controller provided outdated weather information.
Yeah, right.
As well as the ground crew left external fuel tanks attached to the aircraft. And they think the combination of those two things wasn't right for his trip, and it caused the...
Do you know what caused the crash specifically?
Well, that's what the KGB says.
They're just like, it has something to do with this, but...
They say bad reporting of weather and exposed fuel.
That's unfortunate.
So that was the end of our man. But some quick other things I thought was interesting is he spent several years working on designs for reusable spacecrafts.
Sounds a lot like Elon Musk, am I right?
Oh,
What?
yeah.
What?
I like Elon Musk.
Little SpaceX. Little
And
SpaceX mixed
I
in
didn't
there.
want to say it, and I hope it doesn't lessen your opinion of him, but it is now known that the Vostok 1 was completely automatically controlled the entire trip, and he basically just sat in it.
That's what
So
I
he was
expected.
just a
Yeah.
he was just a body.
Yeah, because they weren't sure if he was gonna pass out. They weren't sure if he was
Yeah.
gonna be able to operate it if he was like weightless and stuff.
Yeah, and when
So
you're going though,
he got so
5 miles
famous,
a second.
so famous for sitting in a thing and just taking the risk of his lifetime. And
Damn.
well, I
I
mean,
like it.
look at him now. Well, he's dead now.
Look at him now.
But
He
look at him before
survived
he
so
died.
well, and then
Yeah.
he died.
He was a good guy before he died. So that's my guy, Yuri, pushing the envelope.
I'm
It's
into
good to
him.
know that guy. First man into
He
space.
Pushed quite an envelope.
He pushed the envelope of Earth's
Yeah.
atmosphere.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's quite an envelope.
And then he broke it.
broke that seal.
All right. Well, Connor, what do you got for us?
Well, guys, I was thinking with envelope. Excuse me.
Envelope or envelope?
I say envelope.
Envelope? I mean, it seems like an envelope, but I've definitely heard
I kind of say envelope.
envelope.
I say
It's
envelope.
it's kind of like. Do you have a specific preference when you call envelope
No,
versus
that-
envelope, Joe?
That doesn't bother me, no. It's not like warsh. That's
That's
Warsh.
unacceptable.
Warsh is unacceptable.
Anyway, Connor, back to where you
Well,
were. At.
with envelope or envelope, what I was kind of intrigued by, or what I thought was kind of interesting, just kind of stringing along thoughts. I've got family from New York City. September 11th, 2001 was a big date, and then also in 2001 was the anthrax attacks, where there was kind of a bioterrorism threat, an infectious disease mailed to American citizens, specifically politicians and newsmen, and that became a big issue and a big scare throughout the country.
And this happened during kind of the 2001 time, the same time September 11th occurred?
Right, so September 11th obviously was the attack on the Twin Towers in New York, and then September 18th is kind of when that kicked off the anthrax attack, so that was a week after that.
Wow.
Yeah,
A week
so
after.
directly after that, right, and it's a disease that comes from like livestock, kind of. It's kind of a weird one. It's specified as hoofed animals, I guess. So like cows and sheep and such. But
What,
it's,
you get
Is
the
that-
disease?
but it's basically just a bacteria.
But that originates from hoofed animals?
Right.
Is that what
So, like,
bovine
horses.
means?
Right.
Bovine means, yeah, like cow.
boved?
Cow-like.
But does that have to do with the?
I don't think horses are bovine.
See, I always thought they were. I always thought deer were bovine too.
Interesting. I always thought it was more towards cows and bulls. Maybe. Well, that's something to go home.
There you go.
A bovine originating illness, and it got sent to major political figures.
Mhm.
And people, I remember, were very sketched out about the mail and how it could be corrupted later on.
And just as a curious fact about bovine, it is kind of the aspect of having hooves. It's kind of related towards cattle. So if you call someone bovine, you're kind of relating them towards cattle, if anything.
So it is specifically.
So it is
bulls and
specifically bulls and
Okay.
cows. Yes.
Domesticated.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of
Domesticated, kind of like farming more
Yeah.
hoofed animals.
I see.
livestock.
Livestock, yes. Livestock is a wonderful word for it, Joe.
So anthrax is, like I said, a bacteria and a really infectious disease that can be spread either through physical contact of the skin or inhaling the particles is kind of what happened.
Wow. So just by touching it.
Yeah. So that was what kind of happened with the big scare in 2001, was that there were letters being sent to these people, whether it was at work or at home or whatever, and they would open the letters up and there would be these spores or little particles of the disease.
That would be terrifying.
Right, yeah.
Can you imagine opening
you
up
know
a
what
letter?
it was. Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
during
you-
those
you
days,
open it
even
up.
opening a letter and realizing there's spores in them, and the fact that
You
like
just look
now
and see
we
a little
have such
powder.
good, I want to say anti-venom, even though it's not the word in this sense, but just kind of like anti-poisons or survival against most toxins. Way back then, you get a fucking letter of spores.
It's just 2001, homie. It's not that far long ago.
Hey
Well,
man, I'd
and that's
still
the
be
thing.
scared in 2001. I was 4 years
That's
old
the
and
thing.
I'd be terrified of spores.
Kevin, it was right after the 2001 bombings, and so any sort of suspicious activity, anything that looked kind of like quote unquote scary.
And was it actually found to
right? Yeah.
hurt and poison individuals?
Yeah. So after there were letters sent to Democratic Senators Tom Dashley, something like that, and Patrick Leahy, and in that specific like political attack, I guess you'd call it, 5 people were killed, 17 others were infected.
Damn.
Yeah.
And do you know how many letters went out total? 5 people killed, 17 infected. So those guys obviously did make it into the hospital in time and got treatment.
Yeah. Well.
So it is treatable, but it's just a matter of time. And even if you know that you've been infected.
Yeah, and I'll get to that. So there was the 5 people infected, or 5 deaths, 17 others non-fatally infected. There was then a kind of copycat hoax sort of letter, kind of stirring up a scare.
Someone trying to like steal the
they
fire
said
from
baking
this
soda?
original guy.
Right. And they sent it to a reporter in the New York Times.
I'd been scared shitless.
Yeah, just opening up that letter at your desk in the newsroom.
I'd have dropped it, flamethrower the whole building.
And it
I've got no ties to this letter, I swear.
it ended up just being a fake, and so there weren't any infectious diseases in there.
So no like kind of spores were
Jeez,
spread
man.
throughout the
I
United
think it was
States.
just some punk kid, like.
Well, it was
Yeah.
just in the.
Just a prank to like his old boss or something. This guy was a dick. I'm gonna send you
Man,
baking soda.
that's like a hell of a break.
Yeah.
Though. You. Yeah.
Oh, an
it's
instant
scary.
terrifier.
And you said this was after September 11th truly
Yeah, this
occurred
was
with
a
the
week
Taliban
after
and the attack
one
on
week.
Johnson.
So- Who do you think was sending these?
Just punk kids, or
Well, the real ones, the anthrax ones, or the.
Yeah, the anthrax.
oh, the real ones.
Yeah.
It was probably some radical group that was taking advantage of the situation, or it might have been tied. A home front group maybe tied to the same forces as 9/11.
Yeah.
Do you know? Is it known?
Yeah, it is.
All right, well, let's have it.
Kev, did I get a guess from you?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, we've got Mr. Bruce E. Evans.
Brucey Evans.
Or Ivans, or however.
I can't believe he could even do that.
Even
An Army biodefense expert.
Interesting.
what army, per se? The United States Army or
yeah,
another army?
Yeah, the United States
So he was a
Army.
government employee.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now shut down.
And this was found out 8 years after the case.
Wow.
8
so he
years
was
after
good.
the case, this guy gets figured
Yeah.
out.
He's good.
So 8 years afterward, they discovered it was him. He killed himself in 2008.
Discovered he was the one behind the whole like anthrax
Yeah,
thing.
after his death.
So
He was the
After
one
he killed
responsible
himself?
for sending letters and everything.
Well, he sent the one to the government.
The one to the government.
That ended up killing 5 people and injuring others.
How did he figure that, or how did they trace it after so long?
They had a big FBI investigation. Obviously, such a big national issue, shaping kind of American history. They followed along with it for about 8 years afterward.
Yeah, well, I'm willing to bet. You said they figured it out 8 years after.
Mhm.
That's 2009.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to bet they were on his tail for so long, and they were right about to catch up with him, and maybe he knew it and offed himself because they figured him out right after.
Yeah.
It could have been related, it could have not been, but that's probably what's going to happen. Or that probably did happen.
I believe it. So anthrax, like I mentioned, is a spore or some kind of inhaled or spread like a pollen almost.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a powder, like a clump.
Yeah.
Kinda
So
clump.
that's why the powder was appearing in the envelopes. Right.
Mhm.
And so anthrax, the reason it was such a big scare and like no one really knew what to do with it, was because it would cause inflammations of the brain, the spinal cord, like internal bleeding.
Do you know how long after the initial
That's awful.
kind of infection?
Yeah. So it would take it. So you guys like Breaking Bad?
Yeah.
Love Breaking Bad.
Yeah. So
I'll
what
be
was
honest.
what was the thing they used?
ricin?
Ricin, yeah.
Yeah.
Makes
So
it seem like it cold after a couple days,
Yeah,
and
so
then
it's kind
they
of
can't really trace it.
But it was
to an
kind of
actual
delayed
killable
thing, yeah. So in the case of anthrax, after breathing in the spores, it would take about 10 days, like maximum.
Oh, man.
Like
Is it painful?
usually,
It sounds painful.
usually about 4 to 5 days until people start to feel kind of ill, and then that's when the skin lesions and blisters start to
Oh.
appear. And that's the exterior, and then from there everything starts to shut down inside.
Oh,
You're-
gosh.
And so from there, then you start to vomit, experience shock.
Oh, man.
And just your organs are shutting down.
Do you know what like kind of officially kills you if infected by anthrax?
Your organs just shut
Yeah,
down.
I was gonna say it's probably a swelling of the brain or like a hemorrhaging inside your body.
Mm.
Man.
This is a
Yeah.
maximum
Well,
of 10
so-
days
And that was the
after
thing, is
initial
people-
exposure.
You know, if you get I don't know, some physical injury, it's pretty easy to treat. But that was the thing with anthrax, is it was like, wow, like this is a nuclear, or not nuclear, biochemical kind of thing. Where like if you get it, like what do you do? It's just kind of there.
Well, do we know this guy's motive? Did you figure that out?
I didn't quite figure that out. I think it was
Just
probably
political figures? It was just all
Yeah.
political?
it was after Democratic
Disagree with
figures
them.
specifically, and this was while George Bush
Yeah.
was in office, and he was a Republican president. So it might have been something kind of lashing out at the opposite party.
Do you think he
Mm.
was planning to do that before 9/11, or do you think those events
It's
maybe
possible.
sparked him?
Was it before 9/11?
No, it was a week
It was-
after.
yeah, it was a
So the
week
letter
after.
was the
Yeah.
letter was recovered a week after 9/11. So I believe I would have to assume it's probably planned out a little bit before.
Yeah, but he was riding on the wind.
Yeah, and
I
then this
wanna-
kind of spurred it.
I want to say, just like a curious thought, I almost feel like maybe even this doesn't have that much of a tie to 9/11 simply because the 9/11 was tied with the Taliban, all this kind of thing. Like Osama bin Laden, way back when, like took credit, all that kind of stuff. I almost feel like this might have been a separate instance trying to make a change
Right.
in some other kind of part of America where the Taliban just happened to strike a week
Yeah.
before they planned on this happening.
I agree. Like, you can't plan all that in a week.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if, like, he was waiting for the right moment and he decided because of 9/11 he should do it, or if he had always planned, like, September 18th is my day.
I get that, yeah.
I wonder if that's, like, a special day to him. But who knows? Who knows what his true motive is? All these Netflix documentaries coming out. There's that one about Ted Bundy.
I haven't watched it yet. I'm very curious to kind of see like what that has to expose.
Yeah, we should see what's going on with this guy.
Yeah. Well, and I meant to carry on with that. You guys were kind of talking about how like deadly and what exactly it does to you, Kevin. Usually about 10 to 15% of patients who inhale the spores in the edge. So imagine if you were allergic to pollen and then you started getting kind of stuffy nose and stuff. Like that easy. 10 to 15% of patients who inhaled the anthrax would survive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Damn.
And it says then with aggressive treatment, maybe 50-55% survive.
So this is if you
Wow.
have enough money and are willing to go for this like
Right.
full out treatment, you may have a 50-50 shot of surviving.
And so that's why
A
five
clean flip, basically.
people in the like major United States government died from this, and 17 others were majorly affected.
Yeah. So even at that point, with like major politicians, like these people do have the money.
Yeah.
I can't believe that. That's insane, and it sounds like it's not a good way to go.
No, it's probably pretty painful.
Connor, I do have a question. I don't know if you have the research on you specifically, but do you by chance know what caused this not to become kind of a epidemic in the United States, perhaps, where it just had happened to kill, I want to guess, a few hundreds total in the United States, but
Yeah.
do you know what stopped this from becoming a national epidemic rather than just a few hundred killed, maybe?
I don't have the specific research on me. I know though that it was, like I said, sent by Bruce.
Yeah, it's only
I want to
one
keep saying
guy.
Bruce Irving. Bruce
Evans,
Evans.
yeah.
And so he was the biochemistry expert. So he probably had a supply of it. He sent it to
Yeah.
his target.
A few selected targets, like he personally, because it's a solo operation.
Yeah.
So he probably got to store this, maybe made it himself even. He's like, these people are my most hated. And he compiled like a list. So it's probably not like gonna, because it sounds like it's pretty easy to spread, but they caught it and it was so important figures that they caught it so early. I mean, these are people in the government, so of course it's gonna get like major attention. So they probably got shut down. The Postal Service probably got way tighter regulation. I know after 9/11 particularly, and almost definitely because of this contributed to, the Postal Service was wildly changed and way more strict.
I remember, I can kind of remember 9/11. I remember my pulling me out of preschool. I was, 3-4 years old, whatever it was when it happened. But I've heard them tell me now, and just what I've heard from other people, is that it's scary how quiet it was on that day, simply because there was no air traffic. Like, all planes were grounded. There was no planes flying through the United States, and how much, like, there's a background noise we can't even recognize if you try to focus on it, that just disappears when those planes go away. And I thought that was just
Yeah, that is
personally
awesome.
fascinating.
It probably also contributed that everybody was just somber as fuck.
That too, definitely that too.
National tragedy.
Yeah. That was a shitty day. You guys were kind of talking about like the background and the motives of these guys. The letter that was sent to the New York Post and the NBC News, which was directed towards Tom Brokaw, who was one of the news anchors at the time. So they sent one towards his direction. The note was handwritten and said, "This is next. Take penicillin now. Death to America. Death to Israel. Allah is great."
Wow, okay, so he was like a religious nut job.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's just a solo nut job that knew too much. That's interesting. So I don't really think he was a whole lot connected. I don't think the two were a whole lot connected.
A second note, the one that was recovered from Dashley and Leahy, where there was a fatal case there, like I said, was written, "You cannot stop us. We have this anthrax. You die now. Are you afraid? Death to America. Death to Israel. Allah is great."
Death to America, death to Israel, Allah is great. That's his signature. He doesn't stray too far from the formula. Well, I think we got his message, and that's interesting.
Allah.
It's just interesting to see like the major events that have happened to us that have shaped kind of the world that we now know, especially like in our living memory, us specifically, we're around 21, 22. Like we grew up with major TSA, major postal restrictions. I mean, there's not a whole lot of restriction, but there's quite a few. But if you think about it, pre all these terrorist attacks, it was
Yeah,
you could do
just-
a lot of stuff on
Oh,
planes. Planes were
Mhm.
a lot less regulated. The postal service was too.
So it's kind of interesting for us to like see kind of these recent changes that people like our parents are new to.
And it's kind of like regular for us.
Yeah, it's
almost.
kind of almost regular. It's our way of life now.
It's crazy to think we grew up in a time where everything's kind of more advanced. Everything we have now, like, I remember when I was younger, I still had CRT TVs. I still had
Oh,
the big
yeah.
box in the back.
Dial up.
I'm sure all you guys remember, like, you had
Yeah.
cable, you had all that. It's not the 3-channel shit that, you know, the
Like-
grandparents are like, we had 3 channels and
Yeah.
the antenna had to be one way or the other. Like, we had stuff growing up, but even all of us,
Just
I can
watch-
say, have
we've seen the
watched
big
everything grow up.
progression,
Yeah.
GameCube
Well,
to
everyone-
Xbox.
Yeah.
Let's be
Yeah,
honest.
Nintendo to Xbox.
Nintendo to
When did the
Xbox.
64 came out.
That was around 97.
Yeah,
It was like
it was pretty much the
96
year
or
I was
95, I
born.
think.
My
Yeah.
neighbors had it in 64 was the god tier
Oh,
system
yeah.
to have.
My dad was around for Pong.
Man.
The first game.
On the
At home.
Atari?
The first game at home, yeah.
Oh.
So I mean, every generation is gonna see that though. Technology progresses so fast. When this generation that grew up with iPads in hand since they were 3,
yeah.
when they're our age, they're gonna look back and be like, "Well, I remember iPads."
Yeah.
And the kids nowadays are going around with their Google Glass, and so it's always that's one of the things that's never gonna change.
a little on topic but off topic with that same rant. Like, I just think of 20, 30 years from now where we're all 21 years old. We'll be 41 in 20 years. Imagine how much it's changed since we were born. My mom said one interesting thing the other day, like, a lot of our parents have been together with their spouses longer than we've been alive, in a sense.
Yeah.
And it's just crazy to think about in 20 years how much could change. Where are we going to be at in 20 years as a society, as a future?
Exterminated, maybe.
Exterminated. Kill our planet. Polar bears say bye-bye. We
Well,
say
bringing it back around, Connor, did you have?
That pretty much wraps up what I
Yeah.
had.
Well, yeah.
I
I like that. It's a situation that I think a lot more people need to know about. I think everybody basically knows what happens, but I didn't know exactly that it was 5 people died.
Yeah, and I mean,
I
it's kind of
honestly
been
didn't know
mentioned
that.
and joked about in pop culture, like the anthrax mail and anthrax letters, but there's a lot more in depth.
Yeah.
It was, tied to 9/11. It was an American attacking other Americans. It was a pretty big deal in American history, I think.
Yeah, it's good to be aware of for sure, especially because a death of 5 Americans is almost like a national tragedy level,
Yeah.
especially if they're
Honestly.
important government figures. It's a pretty big deal. So, death comes in envelopes.
Yeah.
Envelopes can bring
Envelopes.
fame, due to
Money.
space travel, fame, money, or death. Bring us home, Joe. What do you have in your envelope?
All right. Well, in my envelope, I have. I kind of thought the same way Kevin did. You send letters in envelopes.
Or death.
Yeah.
Or money.
Yeah. Or but for the most part, usually letters. When was the last time any of you guys sent a letter?
Shoot,
It's been a
man.
while.
Oh, I know. Let's see. It must have been junior year of high school, I think. My English teacher, Miss Ramsey, made us write letters that she was gonna email. See, look at that. I'm saying email. She's going to literally mail to us. Who would have thought when we graduate college? So, I'm interested to see if she does. I can't wait. I put $5 in mine.
Oh,
Nice.
that's
That'll be a
cute.
nice one. So I hand
yeah, that's
I
really
hand
good,
wrote
yeah.
it, and I think that's the last letter I've written.
Nice.
I want to say probably the last letter I've written, other than like thank you letters, because my parents just told
Yeah.
me like you have to write thank you letters for birthday gifts and blah blah blah. But past that
Oh, yeah,
point,
graduation.
I want to say like closer to the end of junior, senior at high school, I had my Eagle Scout Court of Honor. And I wrote a
Oh.
ton of thank you notes from just like gifts people sent me, just cards they wrote, and all
Yeah.
those kind of like meaningful personal things. I wrote thank you letters for that, but other than that,
Yeah. thank you
handwritten letters, I think thank you letter would have to be the last handwritten letter I wrote
Yeah.
personally.
I agree.
Connor.
Other than a thank you note?
Yeah, it's got to be something in high school, I'd imagine. Probably to one of my... No... I think it was probably a couple of years ago when I was doing more radio broadcasting stuff, and I had a big game coming up that I was calling on the air, and I wrote a letter to my old journalism teacher back from high school.
Professional.
And it was just kind of... Because we were pretty good friends when I was a student. He was teaching me. He was a younger guy, so we connected. And it was kind of like, hey, I'm going to be on air if you want to tune in. Thanks for helping me out in school.
Hey, that's a thoughtful thing to put in the letter.
Oh yeah.
What about you, Joe? Are
Basically.
you writing letters?
Well, no. See,
I was gonna say,
I
it sounds
was a bit surprised because of how recently you all have. I was expecting later than that because I have not read a letter in a very long time.
Really? Not even a thank you letter, or
I mean, I guess I did. I
congratulations?
sent, yeah, but I don't know if I wrote anything in them. I might have just put my name.
You still handwrite quite a bit though, taking notes and like writing perhaps like notes on lecture. And,
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
I
Like,
handwrite.
has
Do you
That's
ever
up.
pass notes? Do you ever pass notes in class?
Not really.
That counts.
Well, okay, but see, the last time that I know for certain that I did write a letter, I know I wrote a couple love letters to girls in like first, third grade.
First and
maybe.
third grade, I feel that.
Yeah.
I had a girl ask me
Yeah,
out in
that
second
kind of
grade.
kid. Yeah.
Joe. Do you love me? Check yes for yes and no, for
No.
yes.
You say no, it's wild for about 2 weeks, and then someone else gets engaged.
Kiss me on the playground.
Well, yeah. So that was quite a while ago. Yeah. Anyway, so obviously people don't write letters anymore because it's just not very necessary. We have more technology. You know, but we've been using them for millennia, and they've just kind of become unnecessary. So I kind of decided for this week, I'd somewhat use my discipline of philosophy and literature to write, I guess, just a little essay about envelopes or writing letters.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
So, since the time of Plato, the role of a philosopher has been argued in a lot of ways.
What time is that?
340 BC, about somewhere around there.
Okay.
Plato himself argued that philosophers should be rulers in his republic, philosopher kings. It was a pretty.
Well, of course he did, because he was a philosopher.
Well, yeah. But yeah. So anyhow, there's a lot of ways or a lot of different roles people have given philosophers, and a very, I think, recurring one that you see a lot. Emerson, the philosopher Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, put it into good words: seeing eternity in an instant. And that, of course, can be interpreted in many ways. For this, just kind of seeing the insignificant, like the instant, and recognizing the significance, like the eternity of, whatever it is you're observing. So, writing a letter. I tried to, see the...
It's like a moment of time
Significant.
that lasts an eternity.
Yeah, but you can also see just how eternity has led to that moment, kind of how, the many in the one in the,
The describing of everything, because it only could be described in one way, because of everything that's led to that point and everything that's happened to you.
Yeah.
It's like basically
So,
a snapshot of
in
a
some way,
collision.
everything's interconnected. Yeah.
Yeah.
So with everything that you look at, you can see, try to see eternity. That's,
And then written
Down to
words
that
just
instant.
kind of like a explanation of all that.
written words.
Written words.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, you can try and do that with written words. But I just wanted to see, the significance of something as insignificant, you could say, as writing a letter.
Yeah.
So my first point is aesthetic. Do you know what aesthetics is?
Right.
Kind of the study of art and beauty.
The look of it.
Yeah, well, more than just that.
The
More than
visual kind of.
Well, not just visual.
Oh.
The
For
whole
example, the experience of sublime.
Okay.
Philosophers talk about that. Would be an ecstatic experience.
of the letter
music.
itself.
Music is an aesthetic thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
So it's more just the sensation of beauty,
Okay.
and art.
An emotion.
Yeah, you could say. So not particularly visual. Okay, well, with handwriting, there's a certain delicacy to writing a letter that nowadays we obviously don't have anymore. Art is recognized as the expression of creative and imaginative skill. And obviously we can't dismiss writing a letter as a form of art in some way. And you could also argue that texting is kind of the same, because you could be
Your lingo.
expressing
Yeah.
something in some way.
Well, I think it's interesting because
Ah.
I was just texting a guy recently, and he's the type of guy that uses like 2 letters per word. He'll use a
Yeah.
number, and he'll use
I don't-
like everything's misspelled. You got no idea, and so you're kind of
Yeah.
just sitting there and you're like trying to interpret it. And I think in one text you can immediately tell a lot. Like it is kind of like
It's kind of like
Your
its own
art.
language.
yeah, it's your own language, it's your own art, it's your own sort of creation, and this is what you're putting forth.
Yeah.
This is how I combine words. This is how I make words.
Yes. So to an extent, I guess you could say texting is just as much an art as writing a letter.
Everybody texts
but
a little different.
I'm, going to try and argue otherwise, that writing a letter is at least not a higher art, but just more of a artistic expression.
More of an
Yeah,
artistic
it's an
Yeah.
expression
It's-
of yourself.
Yeah. Okay.
I
Well,
agree.
It's kind
first
of
of
more
all,
personal almost.
writing calls for, you have to pay attention to detail. You have to really think about what you're writing. You can't just go backspace, change a letter,
Yeah.
go alter a sentence right in the middle of it. You have to
Scratch it out.
really
if you really mess up.
Or-
Map out your words almost.
throw the whole sheet away and start again.
Yeah.
Oh, you got
Oh.
big erasers.
Okay, if you're
I
writing
like
in
those
pencil,
big
but
big
If
a
you write in
good-
pencil, that's
if you're
so non-permanent.
a good letter, you gotta write in pen.
You can't.
Pen is
Yes.
professional. Pen is
Wow.
You
very
can't write it in
professional.
pencil. See, I hadn't
Pencil's
even thought
notes
about
and
that when I was
bullshit.
writing this.
All right.
Yeah, no, you can't just
Well,
throw pencils in there.
if I'm writing a long letter and I've already made it in a good amount, I'm gonna do
that's
it in pencil.
that's what I'm saying. There's a delicacy to writing a letter in
You can
pen,
trace it,
because you have to, it's an art form. You gotta plan it out. You gotta know what you're doing. I mean, if you mess up
It's gonna look
making
ugly.
any kind of art, you can't just erase it.
Well, doesn't
Fix
it
it.
express my character at that time to do it in pencil? It's my own art.
Or
Okay, well,
laziness.
then that is, I suppose, you could say closer to texting than it is writing a letter in this argument.
Pencil equals text. Pen equals pro.
Oh my god, what does that even mean?
Okay, so now another point is that, would you say that a person can idly produce art? Like just as a
Like
thing?
they're just sitting there and suddenly art appears, or
Well, like just as a thing that they do, something that doesn't take much thought at all.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just a part of their daily routine, maybe. Do you think they can make art, expressing creative and imaginative skill when they're not being creative at all? They're just, doing their thing, making art.
I completely do.
You think so?
upon whose eye though?
Okay, some of the best
Okay,
drawings I've
yeah, see,
ever
there you go.
done are in the middle of class while I'm taking
Well,
notes.
okay, but you're trying to draw.
No.
You're not.
I'm focusing on his words, but if I'm not taking notes in that moment, I'm just scribbling down. I'll just start
Mhm.
making. A lot of times, what I'll do is just start making random circles and shapes, and then just make it into a drawing. So it's kind of just like I'll do it in my off time. I'll come back to it over multiple days. A lot of times, I'll do that thing where you
Okay,
just kind
well,
of
I mean,
make
it-
diamonds around the border.
It takes. I mean, you're still putting more effort into that than what I'm describing.
It's
For
not.
example, okay, texting and driving. Like you're
What's
not.
the difference? You're focusing
Well, okay,
on, you
but-
have your main attention on one thing, which is the class, and then in your off
No,
time,
driving.
Yeah.
Well,
Driving
no,
is the
okay.
classroom. The doodling is the text. It's the same exact thing.
Okay, but you're not blindly drawing.
Well, you're looking at the text.
You're focusing
you're-
on what the drawing
which is
drawing
true.
is, because otherwise it'll look
Not really.
terrible if
You're
you just add
listening to the
random box
professor
on
with your.
circle.
You're listening to the professor with your head, and you're just doing something with your hand.
I
while he
think there's a
talks.
bit more attention to that than there is
All right.
to texting.
Well, you're the one that
in
wrote the
these
essay,
situations.
So I.
So anyway, but yes, I did have an opposition to that own statement. Guitarists, after so long, it just becomes like second nature to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that
it's muscle
obviously,
memory.
I wouldn't dare not call Jimmy Page busting out a solo not art, right? Even though to him it's just nothing.
But
It's just
He's
like
curious
I
if
would
still
never
thinking about it.
I would never not call that art. I mean, that is certainly art.
If
is what
so
I'm
is
saying.
it
if you
art or
had-
is it a skill to a point where
No.
another guitarist could
See,
mimic what he
A
does?
I
skill.
know,
Is that
that's-
still the same
So
art?
that's kind of what I'm arguing.
Joe,
So
I think-
when
I
you're
think-
texting like that, you're not paying attention to it like you are
Yeah.
writing a letter. It's not just a second nature thing that you don't think about.
I think a skill
So,
can become an
You
art.
could argue, is that art?
Yeah.
Yes.
But okay, see, and the fact with a guitarist, the fact that it's become second nature, does that not make it more artistic in some way?
Well, and that's what I'm saying. So if
Because-
you were bringing up a guitarist, and for example, if you had like what we think of as art, if you had Da Vinci or Bob Ross in front of you painting,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you say paint me a masterpiece, and they'll paint you something amazing. They won't think about it because that's just what they do. It's a skill they have, and it's an art that they're creating. Yeah.
Yeah.
But to them, it's just this is something I've practiced and just done repeatedly until it becomes second nature. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? Is that kind of what you're
Yeah.
getting at?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess to
So
what
art
level,
can be done idly.
Yeah.
See,
If it just becomes something you do routinely, and art just becomes part of you, right?
yeah.
I still think it
I
can be
would
done in
think
other
so.
ways. It doesn't have to just be done by routine.
Well, no, I don't think so. But anyway, just the point is, there's more attention, obviously, to writing a letter than there is to something like texting or
Yeah.
even an email.
Right.
There's a
I agree.
delicacy,
Like when
you
you're
could say.
taking notes in class, it's way different from when you're writing a letter to your friend.
Well,
There's way more thought put into the words, your choice of words, the order, like how it
yeah.
looks.
I mean, writing notes, you're still putting a lot of thought into that.
I don't put any thought into my notes. I literally go
You're just writing what he says.
right from
Well,
the
I mean,
professor's mouth to my pencil and never goes
You're
in
not
my
putting.
brain.
I guess.
As-
Joe, I'm curious, is what you're more trying to get across kind of in the sense of when you send a text, it's almost non-personal level where when you
Yeah.
write a letter, it's your personal writing, you're writing what's going down.
Yeah.
And it's almost kind of compared to text and face-to-face bullying in a sense is what I compare it to, is you can send something over text and not mean it. You can be playing video games, send something to someone and not meaning, but the second you pick up a pen, you write your words on a
Yeah.
piece of paper and you hand it to someone, that's your written word. That's what you've wrote, and that's something you've created. It's a
Yes.
masterpiece.
It's an expression
it's an
of
expression
creative
of art.
and imaginative skill.
It's art in a
But
sense, yeah.
when you're not thinking about what you're doing, in what way is that, an expression of
well, I still think it's
creative
art.
or imaginative skill?
Just because you're not thinking about it, I do think it's still art.
Yeah.
If you just have, it kind of goes back to what you're
You think
saying.
because they're not thinking about it, it's art?
No.
Is that what you said? Okay.
I just think, I think it's been said before, maybe Kevin said, but just beauty's in the eye of the beholder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Maybe they don't think their handwriting is beautiful because it's how they've already always written,
Yeah.
but you cherish that letter because, like, the love of your life has, like, these specific little curly cues and, like, stuff, and it's just,
Yeah.
like,
It's
you hold on to it.
personal.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyhow, I just would like to say back to texting and driving. I think people don't text and drive. They drive while they text because their first priority is texting. Not driving.
I agree.
just
Even
wanted
if
to
it's
say that.
for a short period of time, I think
Exactly.
3 to
don't
4
text
seconds.
and drive, people. Don't do it.
Terrible
Ever.
idea.
Yes.
Okay, but do you change the song you're listening to while you drive?
I don't look at my phone. I don't look away from the road.
Yes.
I
See, there you
tap
go.
up.
And I have a button on my phone or on my wheel that does it anyway,
Oh,
so
okay.
I don't have to look.
Do
at
you
it.
do voice to text? Would you say?
I don't know. I don't.
Would you?
Yeah,
I don't
I'm a
take-
voice
I don't
text
pick up-
person. I'm not gonna type a message.
Yeah.
If
My
it's
phone's locked. So
I'm
I
either
have
gonna-
to like unlock it and
Yeah.
get to the
Yeah.
voice.
I'm
text.
either gonna
I would
wait
do
till I
that.
come to a stop or maybe put it
Yeah.
on Siri and speak to it.
Yeah,
but-
Yeah.
If you hold the home button, you'll open Siri.
Yeah,
up.
not
Okay,
a big
you guys
texting
have
and driving
iPhones.
guy.
I'll do that.
And we hope fans of the Treehouse chat
Yes.
are not
Be
big
safe.
texting and driving
Yeah.
fans.
Do not text and
I
drive.
personally, someone sends me a text, I don't open it. I don't do anything with it till I stop driving.
There you go.
Yeah.
Music only.
So anyhow, the aesthetic of writing a letter.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
Now, my next point, I suppose you could say, is epistemological, which, if you don't know what that is I guess the study of knowledge, how we acquire it. Yeah, it's not really an epistemological theory or anything, just I guess an observation about knowledge. Anyhow, so when you're writing a letter, you could say there's a certain prescience or forethought that has to go into it. Again, you can't just go back and erase what you've done. So cognitively, or you could say even intellectually, it has more demands than it would typing an email or sending a text or anything like that.
So you just have to think more about it. Because,
Yeah.
well, I think the fact also that it's way more permanent. I think even if it's not solely because of the fact that you can't go back, but also because of the fact that when you send this off, these are your words, they're clearly your words, you've signed it, and then it's out of your control who sees it or where it goes.
Yeah.
So it's just like these words you write will always be tied to you, and you don't know who might see it because you can't control that.
Yeah.
Whereas with Snapchat, it disappears as far as we know. I mean, and obviously,
Probably not.
but text, I mean, you send so many texts in a day, like you're really, like they've all kind of lost their permanency.
Yeah.
No one's gonna bring back up a text that you sent 2 years ago, but if you send somebody a letter
Exactly.
2 years from now, you'll be like, you
Yeah.
told me. So I
So-
think that's why they also demand a lot more forethought.
Yeah.
Like you're saying.
And then now, I guess the whole benefit of doing that is I think if you were to write letters and somewhat discipline or cultivate that just practice of forethought and okay, so how often when you observe people just out in public doing things, do you think they act without thinking about it or speak without thinking about it?
Oh, so often.
Exactly, all the time.
Like 80%
I mean,
of the
and
time.
even just reflect on yourself for a whole day. How much of what you've done do you think you've really
Just go
was-
on autopilot.
was? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So to write letters would somewhat just help you think about, of course, the letter, but if you did that a lot, just your behavior in general, and there's obviously a self benefit to that.
It's almost like a meditative time.
Yeah.
Just sit down and write your thoughts out.
Yeah. And in some way, I would see that as a kind of humility, because if you think more about what you're going to do before you do it, to some extent, you don't have the just automatic assumption that what you're doing is the right thing to do. Which to some extent is that's what humility is not thinking that you have the best opinion, the best option. So just, I think, sitting and reflecting on what you do and say prior to doing and saying it is some kind of humility, which Confucius claims humility is the solid foundation of all virtues. And then T.S. Eliot also said something like, humility, the only kind of wisdom we can hope to acquire is humility.
Interesting. So how exactly, I want to rehash this. How
Okay.
exactly is writing a letter giving you humility?
Okay, because it practices the just forethought, thinking about what you do and what you say before you do it. And to some extent, if you were to make that just a habit of yours, so before you did or said anything, you thought about it.
Yeah.
I would argue that to some extent that is a form of humility, because you're not just...
You're thinking about the consequences. You're thinking
Yeah,
about what
you're not
they might
immediately
think.
assuming that what you're going to do or say is fine,
The
and
impact of
everyone's
your
going to
words.
agree with it. Yeah.
Okay.
So to some extent, that's humility.
Okay. I can get on board with that. And that's
So-
why that's the greatest knowledge to T.S. Eliot
The only kind of wisdom that we can hope to acquire
is humility.
is what he
Okay.
says.
Okay.
Yes. And then Confucius says it's the foundation of all virtues.
I see.
Yes.
In that sense, it does make sense. Or
Mhm.
if it just means thinking about the consequences of your actions. Because I do think that that's a foundation of all virtues.
Yeah, well, this is to get into my next point, which is kind of an ethical one.
Mhm.
There's the obvious ethical point of humility, and if you cultivate that, and but then there's another ethical influence. Okay, writing a letter is more of an intimate act, wouldn't you say? Because you have to have
absolutely. Yeah.
a closer relationship to well, I guess not a closer, but there's a certain relationship you have to understand with who you're writing it to. And often a letter is to someone you do have an intimate relationship with.
Yeah, at this point especially.
Oh yeah, especially
Because if
now,
you're gonna
because
go
we
to
don't
the
do
length,
it
yeah.
unless,
It's like, I email you a
or
letter.
unless it's just,
Like, that's a job application. That's like a thank you for my interview.
yes.
That's like, like we were saying, thank you cards. It's like a big deal.
Mhm.
So if you're sending a letter, it's like, you're close.
Precisely. So, I think that if you write letters regularly, even to just a friend, to some extent that would be an intimate enterprise, just the act of writing a letter to them.
Mm-hmm.
And then, are you going to say something?
I'm curious to know, I don't know about the rest of you, but I personally have saved pretty much every birthday card I've gotten, any kind of letter you get for your birthday, whether it be, other than your birthday, maybe holidays or things like that.
Oh, yeah.
I personally still have almost every single one of them somewhere, like, stored away somewhere in my house. I don't know if anyone else saves letter like that, but if I get a letter for someone, it seems almost on a more personal note than a phone call.
Exactly.
Anything else other
It's
than
immortal.
maybe
Yeah,
face to face.
I think that adds to my point. Who here has done that? Saved all
Oh,
of those
yeah, I
things?
totally see
Yes, me
I
too.
think all of us have, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that further adds my point. Just when you receive something like that, it's something you want to hang on to. If someone sends you a text, are you going to hang on to that?
No, it's gonna get.
Well, how
deleted.
dare you?
I'll
You're
switch
gonna
my
look at it and
phone.
then swipe it away and just never look at it again.
What are you going to do, screenshot it and print it? It's
I-
just so
exactly.
lame.
So it's much more of an intimate thing to do.
Yeah.
Now, intimacy, I think, somewhat correlates with empathy. Someone that you have an intimate relationship, you're more likely to empathize with.
Feel their emotion.
Yeah.
Okay.
And empathy is argued one of the pillars of morality, which there's a great TED Talks by Franz de Waal called Moral Behavior in Animals. It's wonderful. So if you want to
I'll
watch
have to check it out.
that. He argues that empathy and reciprocity are the pillars of morality.
Define reciprocity.
Just, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours.
I see. Kind of just ties along with it, yeah.
Yeah.
They're kind of almost one and the same.
Yeah, exactly. I
'Cause
mean,
if
you
you're
understand
empathetic-
their needs.
Yeah, if
so
you're empathetic with somebody, you'll just automatically
I need my
want
back
to.
scratched. I understand. So do
Yeah.
you.
Completely.
Let's make a deal here.
So
Yeah.
they're almost one and the same.
So intimacy in some way begets empathy. Now, if you practice writing a letter, and to just anybody, I guess, whoever it is that you're doing it to, if it cultivates your capacity for empathy, then, perhaps you'll be able to empathize with more than just people you have an intimate relationship with.
Yeah.
So, on an ethical standpoint, writing a letter is good in that way.
It almost can instantly create an intimate relationship
Yeah.
because it's reached that point where it's so intimate.
Exactly, especially now.
If
yeah.
you sent a letter to somebody, just imagine. Okay, well, imagine if you got a letter from like what some of your old high school classmates, and you're like, "Whoa!"
I would be touched.
Yeah, I didn't know he cared that much. For me.
Exactly.
It's immediately like it hit you.
Yeah. So it has an empathetical. Is that a word?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Empathetical.
Yeah. It has an
Empathetic.
empathetical influence.
It's a word now because we're saying it.
Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, humility and empathy through intimacy, I guess, is the ethical influence of writing a letter.
2 strong pillars.
Yes. So to conclude, write more letters. I am challenging everyone in this room, recommending everyone that listens, whoever that might be, including myself, to write more letters.
Do it.
Let's see. Just write to, a family member you only see once a year on Christmas. Just tell them what's happening in your life.
Write
Something
to
you're
your
proud
grandma.
of.
Write to
Something
your
you're
grandma.
concerned about.
Can I say
Ask them what they're proud of, what they're concerned about.
a cool thing? One of my cousins actually for towards Christmas Eve, like most of my mom's side of my family will all get together, and it'll be like a big family Christmas thing. And she wrote 3 letters to 3 just like different people that were big influences in her life. But just wrote like 3 heartfelt letters to all of them. I can swear to you from my own eyes, I watched all 3 of them cry when they read those letters. It's like, it's almost even like face-to-face talking to someone can't even reach the letter almost a letter can.
Yeah.
It's
I
like
feel
so-
it almost...
You could. I mean, they don't know as they're reading it, but in their mind, you could have written that down real quick, or you could have taken a long time to think about that.
Yeah.
And really
The right
reflected.
words. The right words are so powerful.
Yeah.
But you can't really think of them that fast in common conversation. So
Yeah.
take the time to sit down and write out what you truly mean can hit to a point.
Mm-hmm. So yeah.
But I think another thing going on this too is the importance of writing yourself a letter.
Yeah.
Even if it's not a letter, just journaling. I sometimes will just
Journaling,
write
yeah.
down what I did that day. Just like a snapshot in time, like you were saying, from your own point of view.
Yeah.
It's just because, like, think about how many days go by that you just forget.
Yeah,
just like-
exactly.
4 days ago, I could tell you I went to class. I could tell you I probably did homework. But,
Yeah.
like, other than that, it was unremarkable. But if I had an exact journal, like, if I had a little scribble from that night of me and I could think back to my own memories, because it helps you relate to what you've already known. And then you remember. And you're like, I
Yeah,
remember that day. That's that
exactly.
day and that happened. So, like, you can keep your own memory log because you'll forget these things. Sometimes I'll forget these, like, major stories in my life, like, cool things that have happened to me. And, like, somebody will walk up to me, like my brother or something, and just be like, yeah, you remember when we did this? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I totally remember when we did that.
Yeah.
But it's just like you forget until you're reminded. So the power of keeping a journal can be really cool, too.
I certainly agree.
So, right.
So yes, you can learn, you could say, sophistication through the delicacy of writing a letter.
Writing anything, really.
Wisdom through the forethought and the act of prescience that comes with it, and enforce
Humility.
your moral integrity through humility and empathy from writing a letter. So I recommend everybody write more letters.
Write us a letter here.
Just go do it.
Write our address, do it.
write letters here to the
Or
tree
don't.
house.
Yeah. Send them to the treehouse.
You gotta get a P.O. box.
All right, so that wraps it up for envelope. We filled it up with good facts.
I really like that one.
So let's get on
shove
work
it
for
off.
next week.
Send this podcast to your grandparents. They would love it.
Or
In an envelope.
In an envelope,
Yeah.
of
Burn
course.
it. Burn
Oh,
it to a
okay.
CD.
Put it on a flash drive. They're there.
All right.
They're things we
yeah,
use now.
and Kevin, every week we come to you for our random word for the next episode. What do we got this week?
Drum roll for the next word.
Well, for our word next week, we come upon the wonderful phrase, nonchalant.
That's
Are
the
you
word.
for real?
The word is nonchalant.
I didn't know that was one word.
Yo!
That is one word.
Okay.
Nonchalant. Nonchalant.
Okay, I must say here that what I have in my hands is a much more formal, like, speech almost of everything I had said. And I used nonchalant
Yeah.
in here a couple times. And while I was
writing this earlier today, I was thinking, what if that was the word for next week?
It's a prophecy.
I really cannot
Meant
believe
to
it.
be.
That's a weird prophecy.
Prescience. See, even just thinking about writing a letter.
I did
gives you
not
prescience.
know that was one word. I'm very surprised.
I will be
Well,
honest.
I'm gonna end this nonchalantly.
Oh.